Hi guys, looks like we have a nice turnout here. Thank you for showing up. I am Merrill, Content Marketing Manager at Diffbot, and this webinar should take about 30 to 45 minutes today. It will also be on demand afterwards on our blog. Throughout the talk, I'll do my best to keep an eye on chat. Feel free to drop questions or comments into chat, and I'll also have a Q&A section after our demos. So I'm going to throw a link up on the screen. If you already have a subscription or a trial with Diffbot and you would like to follow along, I'd recommend you grab a free 2-week trial. The first few minutes of this talk are sort of intro material before we get hands-on, and that would be a great time to do that. So our topic today is something that affects every startup, every sales team, every solopreneur, every agency or marketing team, and it's how to generate demand and leads. And if you spent any time in this space, you know that it's a typical sort of purgatory of knowledge work. In the movies, it looks something like the image on the left here. And in reality, it looks sort of like the right if you don't like clutter. So it's spending time manually accumulating data points, cobbling together many tools, at least when you start these sort of lead or demand gen sort of projects. And so the trick here, and where Diffbot comes into play, is we can help to standardize your data. We can help to provide clean lenses into firmographic, news monitoring, and external web data, instead of sort of cobbling these things together and not getting good enough support from your data. Even though the data points are online, how are you going to consolidate them? So depending on the stage of demand gen you're in, the type of data and support from your data you're looking for will be different. And I'll expose a few ways that data from Diffbot products fit into these portions of demand and lead gen later in this talk. So to start, let's get the general lay of the land so we can know we're sort of using the same lingo here. So for this talk, I'm going to divide demand generation into 3 clusters of activity. These roughly align with a marketing funnel moving top to bottom. So the first is lead generation. This is a subset of the more general demand gen, and we'll mine in more here. But this is the stage where we do our ABM list building, where we pull together outreach lists. You know, the types of questions you're trying to answer at this stage are, what are the characteristics of our ideal customers? Who are they? Where do they work? How do we reach them? And what do we say to them? And ideally, once contact has been made, you can nurture these leads and they can be handed off to sales. And that's a different set of roles and tasks. So next up, further down the funnel, the category of demand capture. And this occurs when there's existing demand for whatever market your product is in. It's well-defined. People know what their options are. And here we are talking about things like ad retargeting, placement in analyst quadrants, comparison content that really dives into features, and starting to look at intent data. And then finally, we have pipeline acceleration, which feeds off of both of the above categories. So whether you're needing to drum up your own leads or you're simply capturing existing demand. And this final stage is a combination of in-person or virtual events, sales enablement content, understanding who your audience is and when you should reach out and what you should say. So it's personalization and meaningful connections. And really the focus is just on removing any stumbling blocks for your sales team or for self-signups. And so there are a few ways that Diffbot data fits into these stages. At lead generation, we have basically market intelligence queries within the knowledge graph. We're looking at firmographic details. Where is a firm located? What's its size? What industries is it in? What's its technographic profile? We're also potentially finding our cues in news data. Maybe we're monitoring articles that are about a certain industry, and when a certain topical tag pops up, maybe it's an event like a feature launch or a key hiring. Those are cues that whatever that organization has mentioned has met some criteria to become a potential lead. Finally, at this stage, in the end, you're looking at people. So you've likely gathered some list of organizations that fit criteria, but in sales and ABM, you're eventually mining into a certain role, and in all likelihood seeking out contact details. So this can take place in something like Diffbot's Excel integration, where we have support for enriching details about individuals, and then we partner with tools like Hunter or Rocket Reach to also include contact data alongside the job and the firmographic data that Diffbot provides. And then one final use here is just straight up data enrichment from our knowledge graph. So this involves a group of leads you already have in some other program and you want more fields, or you want to standardize the output, make sure there aren't typos, make sure the data is up to date. And that's our enhanced product, which is a data enrichment tool using knowledge graph data. So next up is demand capture. So this is where you already know there's demand in an established market, but you want to know how to tap into it. So here we have Diffbot data like news monitoring, which has fields like sentiment. So you can track how competitors or product categories are being viewed. You have our automatic extraction APIs, one of which is for product pages. And there you could pull in review data over time, maybe spot some weaknesses in competition, pain points of customers, or opportunities. And we've actually passed this sort of review data through our natural language API to get really specific feedback about services, what really works about them, what doesn't, from sort of a perspective of bulk reviewers. An additional way to survey demand here is to keep tabs on competitors with firmographic data, changes in firmographic data in particular. So are they hiring? Who are they hiring? What skills are they hiring for? And this could cue you into where demand is heading or where your competitors are placing their bets in that regard. And then finally, we have pipeline acceleration. So here we may be looking at many of the news monitoring and firmographic fields mentioned in other stages, but they're attached to other outputs. It's more about how you can segment an existing audience. Can you personalize messaging? Can you determine when a good time to reach out is? What are your personal best practices for supporting sales or self-service? We've used our article extraction APIs to categorize our own content. So we knew what our most popular pages were, but we can get these AI-generated topical tags sort of in bulk to see what the real overlap is. And you can sort of start to create intent data in that way. So now that I've provided a bit of an overview, I'm going to hop out of our slides and I want to step through some practical examples of sort of these three components of demand gen, starting with lead generation. So as I mentioned in the earlier slide, lead generation tasks typically begin and recurrently deal with assessing who you want as leads, who you think your leads can be, which leads did well in the past, and what are their characteristics. So here we're looking at surfacing a list of organizations and then essentially mining into people data and eventually reaching out in some way. I see a few familiar folks in the room who might have seen this type of query before, market intel type query, but really what I want to show within the dashboard is how you pivot from looking at firmographic data and you end up with person data about a specific role. So here's a query that you could make in the visual query editor, but for brevity's sake, I'll just paste it in. And say we're looking at somewhat established SMB financial software companies in New York City. And so we want organizations returned, want their industry to be financial software. We want, less than 500 employees, more than 100, and we want for them to be in New York. So you can click search and you have 147 companies. So this is sort of a nice starting point. So what you could do if you're now pivoting to trying to find person data, a specific role, is you could just export as CSV. And we don't need most of these fields for this purpose. We actually just need the name or the unique identifier. And so that is the field Diffbot URI. And can actually just use that. And let's try out the first 40 of these organizations. And we're gonna use this value essentially to say we want people employed at these 40 locations that met some firmographic criteria. And you can obviously do all this via API, but just sort of a quick and dirty way using Excel as basically a worksheet is you can just concatenate. And all I'm doing here is I want to surround each one of these values with quotes and then separate them with commas. And now I could just copy this list. And this is just what I'm going to use hopping back into the knowledge graph to perform a person query. So, let's reset this. And what we can do here is we say, okay, now I want a list of people. I want for their employers to be comprised of that list of Diffbot URIs that I just grabbed. It's sort of an ugly query, but the results are pretty cool. You delete this last comma, and then let's say we don't want everybody from all of these locations, so I'm going to paste in slightly more here, where I'm saying I want these individuals to have a title that includes data science or analyst or business intelligence, and I want them to currently hold that position. And we can click search. So you can see this returns a pretty solid ABM list. This is 1,000 individuals who work in fintech in New York City who have job titles with data science or analytics in the title. And just to highlight a few of the fields that may be of interest, right off the bat, you have social profiles attached to these individuals. If you click through to the full entity in the knowledge graph, you have, a publication history, or you can use their unique identifier to search for articles or tweets. You can use the social profiles to build lookalike audiences for running paid campaigns. Maybe, this was a location-based query, so maybe you invite these leads to an actual physical event. And then if you have Rocket Reach, Zoom Info, Hunter, or a Norbert subscription, we've partnered with all of these contact info providers within our Excel integration. So you could export this list as CSV, load it into Excel, and with our add-on, you can pull in emails and phone numbers where available for all of these sort of hyper-targeted people, ABM list building or outbound sales. So to jump into a second lead generation stage query that's very quick, we have a new filter called Lookalike. So all of the hundreds of millions of organizational entities in the knowledge graph have lookalike scores for all of the other entities in the knowledge graph. It's a scale of 0 to 100. 100 is more lookalike-ish, and it's a fairly simple query. Here I've pasted in a Diffbot URI for one of the organizations that we surfaced in our first query, but you could also use a name. And so this is looking across all of the fields attached to all of these entities. And this particular organization here is, they make recruiting software essentially. And so you can see, Crelate and Job Science, Employee Stream, sort of that's the cluster of topicality here. And this is a way to quickly expand from even like one single organization that you think is a quality lead. You could follow the process we just went through to gain person data, but you could do it about all of these organizations, or you could, maybe you have a customer in a different vertical or a slightly different use case, and you can quickly build out these ABM lists this way. So moving on, we next have demand capture. And if you remember, this is where we have an established market category. We know there are spenders here, and we've moved down the marketing funnel somewhat. So we're talking comparison content, reviews, individuals recently in discernment. We've moved down the marketing funnel somewhat at this stage at demand capture. We're looking to interject ourselves into existing conversations with market players and the public. And so for this, I want to look at two very different tools from Diffbot. On the one hand here, we can look at articles within our knowledge graph. This is great if you don't know precisely where the content or discussion you're looking for will be online. It's an article index about 50 times the size of Google News, and it's augmented with many AI-enabled searchable fields. So the type of exploratory KG analysis you could do is you could survey where existing demand is, or what's good or bad about competition. Where is attention in a given space? Do they care about a cause? Or you could look at sentiment over time for news mentions of an organization. And that's where we'll start today. So let's say we wanted to see sentiment in articles that mention Apple over time. And I'll paste this in chat as well. And so we're basically saying, return articles here. We want them to have been tagged with, this is Apple's unique identifier. We want for their sentiment to be less than 0. And then we want a facet view by week. So basically a summary view. So if you were exploring article data like this, it would probably initially stand out that this last week in January had by far the most negative articles about Apple. So the way you can mine into this is pretty simple. You can basically replace the facet bit of that last query and replace it with 2 dates that bookend that week. And so this will, instead of the facet view, these are the 572 articles that comprise that facet view. And this sort of exercise can be helpful. I mean, we can immediately see sort of the negative clusters of attention. Why was this a negative week for Apple? Because they were having a bit of a tiff with Facebook, and Hyundai couldn't decide whether they wanted to partner with them, and Tim Cook was having to sit in a 7-hour deposition. And if it's not immediately clear from this search result view, we can also facet by topic or publisher country, or facet by sentiment. So let's say sentiment that week was brought down by a few articles. You could facet to say where is the negativity cluster, or the same can be done for positive articles as well. You can join negative or positive conversations, but we're just looking for trends at this point. And this relates back to demand capture, in that you're quickly coming up with a survey of what competition in a clearly defined market is doing well or not doing well, where they're expanding. Really the types of issues that you need to have a voice around. You likely should be commenting in some form on these developments if they're competitors, and sort of interject your voice into existing locations of demand online. So that's sort of the broad approach, where we're casting a wide net at this very large article index. Alternatively, if you think where this intel will be, what domain, you can run with our automatic extraction, aka a ruleless web scraper, and maybe Crawlbot, which enables those automatic extraction APIs to be applied across a domain. And this lets you extract from the same site, much more regularly, many times a day if you need to. Both of these routes, the KG on the screen or automatic extraction routes, can be piped to our natural language API. And that can be custom trained to pull out specific types of facts or mentions of a specific entity, as well as entity sentiment, relationships, and so forth. You basically just would pipe the full resulting text of these articles that meet a certain criteria of being interesting in your space. And so our marketing team did this when we passed over 300 reviews for a Michelin star restaurant through our natural language API. And essentially what it was able to pull out were people's most and least favorite dishes, what regions around the world people associated the cuisine with, what parts of the ambiance or location were important, how people felt about pricing, and even how people felt about different staff at the restaurant. So, you probably aren't in the restaurant space, but if we're competing with this restaurant, we can get a really good view of what works for this place, what people like, what they dislike, what they're focusing on, and where they're heading in the future. And in demand capture, that lets us be responsive early, or start distinguishing ourselves in our messaging, our outreach, and our tactics from competition. We've also seen uses where NLP is pointed at certain indicators on domains, like terms and conditions or privacy policy pages, to try and infer which technologies or tactics are being used, or maybe who their partners are. So that's instead of pointing reviews to the NL API, looking at like a technographic profile of a site. And, so pulling together a custom crawl of a given domain and having NLP parse it is a bit more involved than a simple knowledge graph query. But I can show you a few knowledge graph tactics here. And I'll also show you how you can utilize NLP inside of Google Sheets. So heading back over to our dashboard, one simple news monitoring view into a given space is checking for extracted quotes within articles across the web. So the following query looks at articles that were tagged with Walmart, and it pulls out the most common quotes that were in articles from the last 30 days. So this count field essentially here, and I'm drop this in chat as well. The count field is how many articles have specifically quoted that quote or cited that quote. So these are prominent statements on a topic circulating online. And what we could do here is we can export as CSV. And actually, the only fields we need are callback query and value. I'm going to hop over to, I've actually already exported these and loaded them into Google Sheets. This is the same data. And if you'd like to follow along with that, you will need to download Diffbot for Sheets, which is a free integration. And then you basically log in with your API token. But to quickly show what's possible here, this add-on lets you perform both Diffbot query language queries as well as natural language API calls from directly within a spreadsheet. So sort of at simplest, I can return entities that are mentioned in these quotes. And it's as simple as a function. You just point to the natural language text and, I can drag this down. And not all of these are going to have entities because some quotes are quite short, and they don't have a ton of content. But it's a quick way where you can start to perform NLP and get this sort of high-level view of how a conversation is moving that's happening across the web. Another simple use here is you can gain the sentiment of each quote. So that's the function NLP sentiment, and these functions will show up once you're logged into the Diffbot for Sheets add-on. And this takes the same format. Sentiment is between -1 negative and 1 positive. And now you have something that's sortable. You can start to see like what are the most positive and negative conversations, and at a high level, what are the tags attached to them. Sorry, everybody, that's my dog. And one final function that comes along with the Excel add-in is DQL, where you can essentially directly do a Diffbot query language query. And this could be really useful to sort of flesh out, spreadsheets are often used sort of as worksheets for lead generation uses. And here, all you have to do is you start with a Diffbot query. That's the callback query we downloaded. And you say what field you want returned. And so these callback queries point to this particular quote. And so this is a count number similar to what we saw in the dashboard. So this could be used to essentially make these sortable and show how prominent these voices are. So we can say, let's sort by column C. Let's see, there are circulating quotes about Walmart that are negative. They have to do with disease. They have to do with vaccines, about a shooting at a Walmart. We aren't even needing to mine into the quotes yet. We can simply sort of work through the high level topics like, so climate, water, low carbon economy, presumably Walmart is taking steps in this direction. And so this becomes sort of a sortable tweet count for articles across the web. You may not be direct competitors to Walmart, but this really works for any organization that has velocity of mentions online. So this leads us to our final category of pipeline acceleration. So here we have our audience. They're in our pipeline, but it's all about understanding if you're a good fit and removing barriers for them to sign up. It's about enabling sales to guide individuals through a pilot or enable you to provide enough quality content and direction to enable self-signups. So we use our own tools for pipeline acceleration. At Diffbot, we use our Enhance product, which is a data enrichment product that builds off the knowledge graph. And you hop back into the dashboard. Enhance is over to the left if you're following along. And if I hop into the dashboard, I can input, a person, Mike Tung, let's say, who is the CEO of Diffbot. And as opposed to knowledge graph search, this uses a different matching algorithm across the KG, and it tries to match this to a single person. And in a CRM or database of sorts, you'll likely have a few fields on every individual. So any needed disambiguation would be even better. Common fields attached to leads can be things like the domain and the lead's email, their name, their location, their job title, or all of these things in tandem, which sort of increases the accuracy of this at scale. And you can use this at scale. There's a bulk enhance. You can use it via API or integrations or the dashboard. And it's often worth flipping between person and organizational entities. So that we did a person enhance. Let's say we didn't know that Mike was involved with Diffbot, and that let us know, that now let's enrich Diffbot. And, this is a great segue if you have a bunch of emails and the domains attached to the emails, and then all of a sudden you have all this firmographic data. You know what industries these organizations are from, what location, what size. And we use this sort of tactic for lead scoring. We know that one of our ICPs is a certain size of organization. We know we normally talk to a certain role before closing a deal. So, in a hypothetical, if Diffbot was trying to sell Diffbot, this organization on the screen, we could look at firmographic data in the company profile, and we could say, okay, Diffbot is an AI company. They do a lot of machine learning. They provide a massive knowledge base. Our products would be a good fit. And then we could say they're about the size. The buyer persona could be the CEO, or it could be a research manager, another manager, and so forth. And as you can see, all of this knowledge graph data around the organization is returned from these enhance calls. You can also enhance from spreadsheets as well. You can find funding rounds. You can look at job openings, social media posts, and so forth. Really personalize your lead nurturing and help to remove barriers to accelerate the pipeline. A second way in which we've used our own products in pipeline acceleration is to point our automatic extraction APIs at our own content. So here I pulled up our extraction demo page, and I pointed it at the article I shared just a few minutes ago. So we know our most popular posts from a visitor count perspective, but we can automatically extract topical tags and sentiment and data about who or what is mentioned in the article, and we can start to see clusters there. Our potential leads like content about this, our current customers like content about that. So we're starting to piece together intent data, essentially through web scraping here. And if anybody noticed, yes, our web reading robots do think Diffbot HQ is a sovereign nation. So that's a little Easter egg there. But using this extracted article data, you can then mine in even more and tailor what's being returned with the NL API, which could be trained to deal better with technical content or scientific content or legal content. And so, for example, this is a visual result from our article extraction API. I pasted this into our NL API demo just to show how many more fields are pulled out. And this is, with the NL API, not customized to this unique type of content per se, but it also returns facts, open facts, relationships, So you can use this data to understand at scale what content resonates with a particular audience. Once you pair it up with numbers you already have, like who's visiting your site, where they're staying, what pages they're visiting, and so forth. So that was largely what I wanted to cover today. We utilize our own products for demand and lead generation, and we have built these solutions into internal dashboards, but the data is also there if you just want to dive into the knowledge graph or use an integration or pull data into a spreadsheet. We've worked with partners and customers who use this sort of unrivaled news and firmographic data to craft some really innovative demand and lead gen solutions using some of these techniques we've gone through. I'm going to stick around for a few more minutes to see if there are any other questions or comments. Please feel free to ask away. And if you're heading out, thank you so much for attending.